Wentzel, many would say in today's world that religion is a real phenomenon, but it can be completely explained without a real God, that you can understand it in terms of human needs, psychologically, the group practices sociologically, and looking back in anthropological history, there's a clear development of religion that mitigates any sense of real fundamental truth to any of it.
No, that's true, and I don't think you can make an argument, a scientific argument against that. What I would argue for is that the long history of this, what I would call this symbolic capacity and religious disposition that our species has always had, I think needs to be honored and respected, if you want, and in doing that, I think we need to understand that for many people, these ancient traditions in their contemporary or ancient forms represent a kind of a more to life and how it makes sense, how to make sense of our own vulnerability and death and suffering. I also think religious traditions in their many ways, in spite of the many harms they've done, are great incentives for ethical behavior. And yes, you're right, we can make strong scientific arguments why religion can function perfectly well without God. But for getting God back into the picture, science is not going to be helpful. That is always going to be a deeply personal a commitment that is a commitment that goes down to all kinds of psychological and philosophical personal dispositions in different kinds of individuals. So I do believe religious faith is a deeply personal thing, and as such should be treated. But I do believe it can be enriched, and this is what I've been arguing for, by taking aboard so much of what is out there in science and technology, and bringing that back within the folds of this interdisciplinary kind of intercession. So I'm not going to be able to give you a knockdown argument for God or even for belief in God, but I'm going to say why for many people that makes enormous sense and is consistent with what humans have always been about, even if we cannot prove it scientifically.
So you happily accept all the scientific evidence, all the psychological evidence, the evolutionary psychology of the development of religion, but then add to it a personal dimension, which then changes its character into a social process that involves God, but that's only happening because it's something deeply personal, as opposed to looking at the external evidence.
Well, you see, yes, and what I would add to that is what I would find difficult is why in any one of these sciences the final word or the reductionist word should go to that specific approach. I am deeply impressed and overwhelmed by science, but at the same time, I don't know if I need, as a theologian and a philosopher, do I need to accept that empirical methodology should have the absolute final last word in explaining away religion or explaining away God.
That's the core issue, because can you go beyond the empiricism? Because science says you have no evidence.
Yeah, that's right. But what I'm also saying is that in saying that, science has also now no reach beyond that empiricism that itself professes, and therefore how does it adjudicate whether there is more to life than just highly empirical issues? And I think that religious dimension and the beliefs that we can do a lot about in terms of, as we said before, sanitizing them, can still function incredibly strongly in directing our human lives. But strong commitments to the content of what it is we believe about That I think is a very clear commitment to religious traditions and to the kind of God or gods that we believe in. That is not something that evolutionary psychology or neuroscience can explain to me or argue me out of, if I can put it like that. So in that sense, we will always part ways. I believe that we have certain deep commitments, faith commitments, that are not up for destruction, if you want to put it like that. But I am willing, as I said earlier, to open all of that, the conceptuality of all of that, up to criticism. I'm very willing to listen to what the problems with my tradition, with my concept of God, with my concept of faith might be, and to flesh that out into a way that might make optimal sense. But I just cannot believe that by empiricist criteria, it would be enough for me to have to shut down that part of my life.
Because you're saying that by the very nature of your belief falls outside the sphere of influence of the empiricist, the scientific point of view.
Yes. What makes it so difficult is that so much craziness in religion. So we don't have we don't have the time and the opportunity to often to make those distinctions but we do this obviously in a very personal way. And those of us who teach like I do, try our best to integrate the religious dimension to life and theological dimension to life, whether in what you called earlier purpose or creation. How does that play into the living of the ordinary, daily, meaningful life? And I think therefore it has meant a lot to me.
What about the pervasiveness of religion? If we look in the world today, and if you look throughout anthropological history, you just see an enormity of religious beliefs and practices and rituals and interactions. Is this a helpful data to support your view that there's maybe something behind this beyond its social manifestations?
Yes, but not in the sense that the more we find religion, the more likely is for God to exist. I'm not saying that. I am saying it is, in a sense, it does make clear my earlier point that if our most ancient ancestors, as we now know, had a very clear sense of symbolic activity, ritual, religious faith in some prehistoric form, if that is true, it is still true. People the world over are still religious. That's not an argument for God, but it is an argument for what it is that we humans, or most of us, feel we need. And it is a challenge to those of us who are religious to find out if the traditions that we've been part of, if there is a way to identify the core of that and to refigure that in terms of contemporary traditions, thereby still find a spiritual fulfillment while living side by side or within a scientific world. So as I told you before, I'm very willing to prune back all kinds of excessive or extravagant, Baroque type beliefs, but I don't think it goes to the heart of the spiritual sense that I find would be so important for large groups of people. Of course, then, and the discussion that we're not even having here is how all of that is then embedded in big traditions and in various kinds of institutionalized religions, churches, temples, whatever. That is a whole different kind of tradition or conversation that goes beyond this kind of interdisciplinary
But at the end of the day, to really get to the essence of belief, it really comes down to, in your view, a purely personal, experiential matter.
That's right. But I want to show that purely experiential personal matter is highly consonant with what the world of science and technology is giving us there. I want to show that they can optimally live together. That is ultimately what it's about, and that we do not have to choose there. At least that's how I feel.